Tom Brady showed up to Raiders OTAs yesterday, not in some ceremonial shake hands and wave capacity, not sitting in a comfortable chair somewhere upstairs watching practice through tinted glass. He was on the sideline, present, watching quarterbacks throw, studying the offense, standing inside a building where he now holds real financial ownership. And I genuinely don't think people have fully absorbed what that image means yet, because when you slow down and actually think about it, that moment is far more significant than the casual OTA coverage it's been wrapped in. Let me start with the Raiders' reality going into this offseason, because context matters here. This franchise walked out of last season carrying real wounds. The expectations were genuine, the results were painful, and Raider Nation felt both of those things simultaneously in a way that's hard to shake. The regime has turned over. Clint Kubiak is running this operation now, and the atmosphere filtering out of that building already feels structurally different. Pete Carroll brought a certain veteran warmth to his tenure, a seasoned, comfortable presence that works beautifully in certain environments. But a roster rebuilding around a first overall pick doesn't need comfortable. It needs sharp edges, daily accountability, and a competitive standard that makes every player in that building feel like nothing is protected. From everything coming out of these OTAs, that's precisely the environment Kubiak has engineered. But I keep coming back to Brady on that sideline because I think it's the single most underreported story of this entire offseason across the league. 7 Super Bowls, a career that permanently expanded what we believed was possible at the quarterback position. The most studied, most decorated, most analytically obsessive player the NFL has ever seen. And he is now standing 20 feet away from Fernando Mendoza, watching a 21-year-old try to figure out professional football in real time. Andrew Janocko, the offensive coordinator, was asked about Brady's presence when media got their session after practice. And what Janocko said wasn't a rehearsed answer. He called Brady an unbelievable resource, not a figurehead, not a name on a letterhead. A resource, accessible, available, engaged. The kind of presence that transfers knowledge in ways that no film session or playbook ever could. Think about what Brady actually carries in his head. The pre-snap recognition built across 2 decades of reading the most sophisticated defensive minds the league has ever produced. The understanding of how safeties telegraph their rotations before the snap. How corners communicate leverage through their alignment. How to manage a game emotionally when momentum is bleeding away and everything around you is starting to come apart. These things don't live in a textbook. They don't transfer through a whiteboard session. They transfer through proximity, through conversation, through watching someone who has genuinely lived every scenario process the game in real time. Fernando Mendoza has access to that. No other rookie quarterback in the NFL, not one, has anything close to that. And if you think that's a marginal advantage, you're underestimating what quarterback development actually requires at the professional level. Now let me walk through what the field actually looked like, because the football itself had real substance. There were notable absences worth tracking. Cornerback Taron Johnson didn't practice, Jermaine McCoy was out, Nakobe Dean sat, and Ian Thomas didn't participate. Dean in particular is a name to monitor, given what his defensive versatility means to this team's overall scheme. But the absences weren't where the real story lived today. Kirk Cousins and Brock Bowers were. And I'll be direct with you about how it went. Early in 7-on-7 work, Cousins threw an interception to Jeremy Chin. That happened. There's no framing that makes it not happen, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. You don't want to see your starting quarterback throw a pick in front of the media during the portion of the offseason that's supposed to feel like forward momentum. But what I've learned from watching Cousins over 12 NFL seasons is that the response tells you more than the mistake ever does. He didn't tighten up. He didn't retreat. He went right back to Brock Bowers over the middle for a clean completion. And then, later in that same session, he found Bowers deep downfield for a touchdown. Separation. The defense couldn't recover. The sideline reacted. 1 bad throw, 2 answers. That's the version of Kirk Cousins that makes this offense functional. That touchdown deserves more than a highlight mention. Brock Bowers getting behind a defense downfield isn't just a nice OTA moment. It reflects something real about where this quarterback to tight end connection is heading. Bowers creates defensive problems that don't have clean answers. He can align anywhere. He generates mismatches from every single position on the field. When a defense invests heavily in taking away his short and intermediate routes, the grass opens behind them, and Cousins finding him there in a live competitive setting suggests a developing chemistry that will matter considerably when September rolls around. What Bowers said after practice is what I want to stay with for a minute, because players in these settings almost never give you real information. OTA media availability is usually careful, guarded, almost performatively optimistic. Bowers broke that pattern. He addressed his knee directly, the one that quietly compromised his performance across significant stretches of last season. and said he feels great. Said getting back on the field at full speed has been exactly what he needed. Said the offseason has been productive, the preparation has been right. For a player who kept producing last year while managing physical discomfort that would have completely shelved a lot of other people, that update carries genuine significance. A fully healthy Brock Bowers inside a functioning offensive system is a problem that defensive coordinators lose sleep over. The Raiders heading into 2026 with that version of him is a real advantage, not a hypothetical one. Tyler Linderbaum was asked about Bowers too, and I loved what he said. He talked about the killer mindset, that quiet, almost invisible relentlessness that separates talented players from players who actually maximize themselves. He said Bowers doesn't say much, just works. Then he laughed about how surprised people were that Bowers even came out to talk to reporters at all. That's not an accident. That's character revealing itself. The best players at this level are almost universally the ones most indifferent to external noise, most locked into the next rep rather than the last compliment. And then Bowers himself said something I want you to actually hear. He said this year there is urgency, that being urgent in everything is the standard they're holding themselves to. And when he says that, drawing an implicit contrast with how last year felt, he's confirming something the fan base already understood from watching. Last year's urgency was often declared out loud. This year's urgency from inside the building sounds like it's actually embedded in the daily culture. That cultural shift has Clint Kubiak's fingerprints all over it. What stands out to me watching this regime operate through the spring is the absence of a hype machine. No manufactured excitement, no vision statements dressed up as promises. It reads like a serious football operation running serious daily accountability. The contrast with how Carroll's final chapter felt, that established, comfortable presence that simply doesn't fit a rebuilding roster centered on a developing rookie quarterback, is real and consistent across everything coming out of that building. Players don't describe urgency when it isn't there. They might soften things in public, but they don't manufacture a feeling that the room doesn't actually have. Now let me get to Fernando Mendoza, because this is where I genuinely want to slow down. The first overall pick of the 2026 draft. 21 years old, walking into professional football with every weight imaginable already placed on him. The franchise expectations, Tom Brady watching from 20 feet away, and Kirk Cousins in the same quarterback room as a daily professional measuring stick. That is an enormous amount of pressure for a young person to carry from day one, and how a player carries it tells you everything about what you actually have. The field reports on Mendoza today were honest, and I want to honor that honesty because it matters more than comfortable narratives. In 11-on-11 work, there were rough moments. A ball from Mike Washington got tipped by Gary Smith. A pass slipped through Jonathan Brady's hands. He overthrew Brady deep. These things happened and they're real data points, not condemnations, but information. Mendoza played with Brady at Indiana, so the chemistry between them is established, which makes the miscommunication slightly more notable. Though in fairness, the NFL is a categorically different environment than anything a player has experienced before, regardless of how decorated their college career was. Everything is faster, defensive windows are narrower. The footwork precision required at this level is surgical in a way that college simply cannot prepare you for. Timing that worked at Indiana doesn't automatically transfer to an NFL field against NFL-caliber defenders. But what happened after those rough sequences is where I want to spend my energy. Mendoza ended the 7-on-7 session with a deep throw down the sideline to Malik Benson that, by every account from inside the building, was precisely the kind of throw that made him the #1 pick. Clean, confident, accurate. He finished the session on a high rather than allowing the difficult middle to define everything. That instinct, the ability to reset internally after mistakes instead of tightening up and retreating into conservatism, is one of the most important qualities a quarterback can possess and one of the hardest things to develop artificially. Footwork mechanics can be corrected, progressions can be trained. But the internal reset button, the thing that keeps a player from compounding a bad throw into a bad drive into a bad game, that is either part of your wiring or it isn't. Today, Mendoza showed it's part of his. The things people inside that building are volunteering about him go well beyond the physical, and those assessments are the ones that actually matter. Trey Tucker was asked about Mendoza, and the answer stopped me. He called the mentality elite. Not solid for a rookie, not impressive given the circumstances. Elite. He said if you watched Mendoza practice without any context, you'd think you were watching an undrafted free agent grinding every single day just to stay on the roster. No entitlement, no draft position comfort, no treating the first overall pick designation as a buffer against real accountability. Just a player who understands what the standard requires and meets it without being prompted. That is a character assessment from someone watching up close every day, and those assessments cut through everything else. Brock Bowers spoke about Mendoza too, and given that Bowers doesn't hand out praise without meaning it, what he said registers. He focused specifically on the mental dimension of the transition. the part that physical evaluation during the draft process never fully measures. The ability to absorb a professional playbook and translate those concepts into real field decisions under live defensive pressure is exactly where young quarterbacks either develop into franchise starters or stall into journeymen. Bowers said Mendoza is doing a genuinely good job staying locked into the playbook and taking in as much as he possibly can as fast as the system is being installed. For a tight end who is going to be one of Mendoza's most important targets for the next decade, that observation about how his quarterback is mentally processing the game is not a polite comment for the cameras. It means something. Janako gave the most complete, honest assessment of where Mendoza actually stands developmentally, and I have real respect for how directly he answered. He said all three quarterbacks in that room come in every morning wanting to work, wanting to compete, wanting to get better, and that the environment Kubiak has constructed is specifically designed to generate real growth pressure, regardless of where any individual sits in the depth chart. That detail matters. It tells you this staff is not managing a predetermined depth chart outcome. They're creating genuine daily competition, which is the only environment that actually accelerates development at the quarterback position rather than just maintaining it. Then Janako got precise, and precision is where real coaching relationships reveal themselves. He mentioned footwork mechanics at the snap, specifically getting away from center cleanly, which sounds like a minor technical detail from the outside, but is actually foundational because every movement in a quarterback's drop is built directly on top of that initial step. He talked about progression timing. The calibration between moving through reads fast enough to hit throwing windows before they close, and slow enough to not abandon developing routes too early. That balance is genuinely one of the hardest things to master at this position. The right rhythm is different on every single play based on defensive alignment, coverage rotation, and route timing. Mendoza is somewhere in the process of internalizing that rhythm consistently, and Janako is invested enough in what's actually happening to describe it with real specificity rather than comfortable press conference language. The developmental environment surrounding Mendoza right now has no real equivalent for a first-year quarterback anywhere in the league. Kirk Cousins in the same room daily, 12 years of professional experience, a quarterback who has faced virtually every defensive concept and pressure package the NFL deploys, someone whose pre-snap communication habits and preparation routines are a living professional curriculum that no amount of film study can replicate. Mendoza can observe how Cousins identifies incoming pressure before it materializes, how he communicates adjustments to receivers and linemen in real time, how he processes information and makes decisions under the kind of stress that college simply never replicates. That proximity is a real education. And then Brady is in the building on top of all of that. The layers of that developmental environment have no comparison for a 21-year-old quarterback trying to figure out the professional game, and while resources don't make guarantees, they absolutely accelerate development when the player brings the right disposition. Everything coming out of that building says Mendoza brings exactly that disposition. Then there is Max Crosby, and I want to give this the emotional honesty it deserves. If you followed the Raiders through the spring, you know how genuinely close this came to going a different way. Trade conversations involving Crosby were real at various points during the offseason. The possibility of this franchise's most important defensive player, the person who anchors everything this defense is trying to become, actually wearing a different team's colors when September arrives. That was a real possibility that hung over this fan base uncomfortably for weeks. And now he's back. Not yet cleared for full practice, still working through his physical process, but present on that field, stretching with the team, talking to players, filling the space with an energy that changes the temperature of a practice environment, even without pads on. That's what Crosby is. The pads are almost incidental. He walks onto a field and something shifts. Seeing him out there, knowing the situation resolved, there is genuine weight in that for this fan base. Crosby isn't merely a player you track on a stat sheet. He's a symbol of what this franchise has been working to establish on the defensive side of the ball through years of dysfunction and false starts. When he's fully healthy and operating with real purpose inside a new defensive scheme that suits him, what this team might see from him could genuinely be the best version of Max Crosby anyone has watched. That's not emotional exaggeration. That's a reasonable expectation built on who he is when the circumstances around him align properly. What these OTAs are building day by day is a picture of something being constructed with actual intention behind it. The quarterback room architecture. Cousins establishing professional daily standards while Mendoza develops at a pace that builds rather than breaks. Brock Bowers entering the season physically whole rather than managing injury through a long week. Max Crosby's presence holding the defensive identity together through his recovery. The cultural shift under Kubiak from stated urgency to something that sounds, from inside the building, like actual urgency embedded in the daily standard. And Brady walking those halls as perhaps the most valuable informal resource any NFL franchise has had available in the modern era. None of this guarantees wins. I've seen enough rebuilds collapse under the weight of optimistic spring narratives to know better than to make those promises. But what I can tell you honestly is that the foundation being assembled right now looks genuinely different from what this franchise has been doing. And the most reliable indicator of that isn't what the coaches are saying at podiums. It's what the players are saying voluntarily. When Bowers talks about urgency without being asked, when Trey Tucker describes a rookie's mentality as elite without any prompting, when an offensive coordinator speaks with real precision about what his first overall pick still needs to fix rather than telling you everything is perfect. These aren't messaging strategies. These are people describing something real that they're living inside every single day. The work is actually happening in Las Vegas right now. Whether it pays off this season or whether 2026 becomes the foundational year of something that arrives later, that answer belongs to the games. But right now, I feel something specific about this team that hasn't been easy to feel for a while.